A few weeks back, I talked about the promotion of Heather Antos to group editor at IDW, and in a very tongue-in-cheek manner, I did blame Richard, Comics Matter with his boy Zack, Diversity in Comics, whatever you want to call him. And then some people took me pretty serious, and I absolutely was not being serious with that. Now, I do believe Heather Antos got the promotion because of the platform she's received due to the criticism that she got on YouTube from comic book skeptics. But I think for the most part, things would be worse without us. And here to have a conversation about where comic books would be without the YouTube skeptics is my good friend, Doc. How you doing, Doc?
I am great, sir. Yeah, I like this topic because it's one of those hypothetical alternate future reality things that are always fun to speculate on. But somehow I think we always end up in the best possible outcome.
So I will admit, I do believe Heather Antos is in the position that she is, not because she's a good editor, but because people want to own the judge and they're supporting someone that has been criticized, rightfully so, here on YouTube. I think there are some negative effects of this. I think Mags Visaggio, at a time, got a lot more work than Mags would have ever gotten based on the quality of the work that they had done, because of some videos out there. So there have been some negative effects. I don't blame Richard. I don't blame BBS. I don't blame myself. I don't blame Perch. I actually don't blame the people that are spotlighting the problems within the comic books. I blame the terrible leadership within comic books and the fact that they will make these stupid decisions.
There's no doubt that there's been a bunch of spite hires and people that, in order just to spite the critics, still have careers in this comic book industry as a result.
While there are certainly some people that have been able to cash in on the notoriety they got from their bad work in comic books, I do know for a fact that Mags Visaggio at both DC and Marvel has been trying to change a lot of established characters into trans characters, been trying to do it for years, and has always gotten shot down. And I think without YouTube skeptics, that probably would have happened at DC and Marvel.
You're probably right. I mean, granted, I do have a little bit of faith that the companies wouldn't entirely set themselves on fire. They would have let it happen to a bunch of Z-listers, but eventually, if it keeps happening, they'd be like, okay, look, you did it 3 times now. Fucking knock it off. Come up with something new. I think even they would eventually get sick and tired of running that exact same plot and idea and story motivation multiple times.
Another thing that happened, obviously, during the time that we've had the channel is what happened to Vertigo with Andy Coury, where he basically goes in there, gets an established brand within DC Comics that is revered, one of the most influential brands in the history of comic books. He takes it, they say, you run with it. He goes out there and hires all of his friends. Turns out some of them are criminals. Turns out most of them are just bad people at a bare minimum. And he basically destroyed the entire brand of Vertigo. We will likely never, ever receive a new Vertigo comic book in our lifetime because of what Andy Coury was allowed to do unobstructed because of just bad leadership at DC and Marvel. And I do believe the spotlight that I've given that Richard has given that Doug Ernst has given that a lot of skeptics on YouTube absolutely highlighted and said, this was an enormous failure. What the hell were you thinking? Has prevented things like that from happening in the future.
Yeah, I think that it creates a pretty good check and balance on the industry. Again, I would love to have enough faith to believe, oh yeah, the companies would stop their own hemorrhaging, but they've demonstrated time and time again that they don't. They'll let themselves bleed out because they think that they haven't done anything wrong. They just haven't been allowed to do enough of it yet. So if it wasn't for people like you, people like Doug, people like Zach, people like Ethan, if it wasn't for you guys, yes, they would have kept digging that hole deeper and thinking, well, I can stop the bleeding by just, I don't know, dig all the way through my leg instead of Band-Aid it up at some point.
Absolutely. And another thing that I think has been a good byproduct, because the current continuity at Marvel is awful. Like, Marvel's continuity makes DC look really, really good in comparison, in my opinion. So what Marvel has done is they brought in a bunch of really good creators from the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and they're writing stories of the Avengers, stories of the X-Men, stories of Hulk, Spider-Man, but set in continuity 30 years ago, and at least giving old school fans, people that actually want quality in their comic books, an alternative to the drivel that they're creating that isn't just old comic books.
And that's the one thing that I feel like a lot of us have kind of forced upon them. with different hashtags over the years, or our overall push to take money out of the new comic market and push for back issues only. Well, Marvel and DC, they still want some of that money. So they're like, well, fuck, if we're not giving them the current continuity that even remotely lines up with what they're asking for, we can at least create new product set in the time that they do like in order to get some of that money. Because they were losing all of our money and now they're only losing slightly less.
Most of it, yes.
Yeah.
But at least there's an alternative out there with some actual good comic books. Almost everything good being produced by Marvel is set in continuity 30 years ago, and it doesn't have an impact on what's moving forward, but at least it gives you something to read. And I think the place that most YouTube skeptics come from, I honestly do not believe a majority of us want comic books to die. They don't want DC and Marvel to go under. I know I don't want that. I don't get the feeling that that's what Richard wants, what Doug wants, what Englund, Captain Frugal, any of these guys want. EVS, I don't think they want the industry to die. I think we're going out of our way to highlight what is wrong with the industry and why they're losing so badly, why so many people walked away, because we don't want comic books to die. I want DC to be thriving. I want Marvel to be thriving. I want a great competition between the two of them to see who can have the best modern shared superhero comic book universe. Both of them are failing right now. I am here to shine a light on a lot of things that are wrong, but I also shine a light on the things that are right. So I don't think most of us actually come here with a negative intent in mind. I don't come out here to destroy things. I want things to get better. And if you can't understand what's failing, if you can't understand why people are walking away, if you can't understand how far off course you've actually veered, you will never actually get back to where you need to be successful again.
The reason why we talk to each other about this, the reason why we do videos like this one or live streams or whatever, is to provide some context to, hey, look, we've stopped spending our money on your product. Would you like to know why? For years and years and years before the YouTube comic skeptic critic world really existed, the publishers just kind of had to guess. Twitter says that it's for this reason, but this message board over here says it's for this reason. Instead, we're giving you complete, full context, no moderation, other than what YouTube forces upon us, on why we've decided to take our money and walk away from your product and instead put it on these other products. We're providing useful context that the publishers didn't have before.
And I think in a lot of cases, they are listening. I know for a fact there have been many projects that have been in production but never saw the light of day. Like New Warriors is a great example. I know that thing is complete. There was a listing on Amazon. They had the release dates for the single issues and all that stuff. And no one's ever seen it because the YouTube skeptic, like comic book community was out there saying, this is an enormous joke. What you're putting out there is a travesty. And they actually came to their senses and realized, you know what? We don't want to embarrass ourselves here. And that's a huge win in my book.
I think so as well. I mean, we managed to mobilize a fan base and pop culture fans in general, even beyond just the comic book fans that would otherwise be watching our videos, managed to make it an absolute embarrassment to Marvel with that. I remember they put up that video trailer on their YouTube channel, and that thing got so many downvotes that YouTube changed their downvote policy as a result of that one and like 3 other things that all happened around the same time, because it was such an embarrassment to one of their big account holders.
New Warriors was absolutely going to be an enormous embarrassment, and I do hope they still release it because I do want to review that one. But DC and Marvel should absolutely be kissing my hairy beanbag and that of Richard and Doug and EVS and Eric July and everyone else that has actually kept the comic book community interested, engaged in comic books, because I hate to break it to DC and Marvel, I'm more interesting, I'm more entertaining making fun of your comic books than the comic books themselves. Eric July is far more entertaining than any issue of Spider-Man that you're going to receive from Marvel Comics this month. Ethan Van Sciver on his channel is more interesting when it comes to comic books than the latest issue of Batman. And that's just a fact. We are actually keeping comic book fans around and hopeful and pointing out what's wrong so they know there is a voice to their frustrations. They're not alone. And perhaps in the future, there is hope for something to get better. And maybe if you do hang around, Marvel and DC will correct course. And when that does happen, I will tell you, Richard will tell you, Ethan will tell you, Eric July will tell you, Captain Frugal will tell you, Doug will tell you, and we'll all tell you, yes, this is actually what we've been wanting. So without us, most fans would have left and never even thought about comic books again.
Were it not for this, the comic YouTube critic world, I would have gotten to the same point that I did with quitting comics, quitting new comics. And instead of actually still wanting to be involved in it, be engaged with what's going on, somewhat keep up through conversations with people, I would have just taken my money, walked away, stopped buying old comics too, probably started selling off my collection, given up completely on comic books entirely, went on and take my money somewhere else. So that if and when the comic book industry comes to its fucking senses, decides that it's going to stop setting its own IP on fire and decide to actually make things that are designed to appeal to a mass audience and sell and move large numbers of units that idiot normies like myself would really like to read, I'd be aware of it and ready to come back. But instead, I would have just walked away, had nothing to do with it, and never known if they fixed their problem. At least now I'm staying engaged enough to know that if they start fixing their shit, I'm aware that it's been fixed so that I can come back.
So in my opinion, in a whole, the comic book YouTube skeptic community has been far more beneficial, not only to comic book customers, but the industry itself, than it has been a net negative. Yes, we have had some idiots like a Heather Ontos get promoted well above her station or capability. Yes, those things do happen. Mag Visaggio got on a couple of books that she probably never should have written. But there's been a ton of stuff that wasn't destroyed because somebody was actually out there keeping an eye on what Marvel and DC were doing and pointing out their enormous mistakes. There are a lot of things that were never created that they would have liked to have greenlit because they knew they would get made fun of and mocked and ridiculed, rightfully so, right here on YouTube. And there are a lot of people hanging around by a thread because somebody's actually out there to entertain them and speaking to them in a language they can understand and letting them know you are not alone, you are not lost, this is wrong, and when it's right, there might be a good reason to come back. Far more beneficial than actual harmful to comic books.
The comic book industry owes an immeasurable amount to the comic book YouTube crowd. You are still evangelizing for them. Every industry needs evangelists, and evangelists with credibility. Every industry that runs off their own evangelists ends up setting themselves on fire. The fact that you guys are still here, still evangelizing for the medium in general, is something that they can never repay you for.
During that conversation, I did mention a couple of examples, and one of them being the death of Vertigo Comics at the hands of Andy Corey and just terrible mismanagement of DC Comics. If you weren't around here on the channel, or maybe you don't remember exactly how it happened, I break it all down right here in painstaking detail, just how they dropped the ball so bad and how many terrible things they did with that new launch of Vertigo. There's also a link in the video description.